Here's an update on my homemade table saw, and as you can see, things have changed significantly. That is the old saw, and you can see in the table I have a new saw. So I'll quickly run through what went wrong. The problem I was having with this table saw, this one right here, was I was getting a blade wobble. So as the cut would progress, the blade would just wobble periodically, almost like resonance was building up. I thought it may be the problem of the bearing. This is not the same bearing, but it's similar. So I ended up tearing the whole unit apart, tearing the whole little induction motor apart, and what I found inside was a little bit different than what I expected. Typically on a table saw you'll have two bearings and then the arbor. The bearings are supported kind of on one side, and there's usually a belt on the other side, and then the blade sits on this side, and that way all the force gets transmitted through these two bearings. On the induction motor saws, to save costs, I'm assuming, they have one sizable bearing next to the blade, and on the back all they have is a bushing. So when I took the unit apart, I was able to pop this bushing out, and I found that there was some play in this, so I ended up remachining that. Before I actually remachined that piece, I took the initial bushing out of the saw and went around with a punch and peened the inside to kind of raise a burr, and that would hopefully tighten the fitting. I put it all back together and I found that it helped. So then I went and bought a nice piece of bronze and remachined the bushing for it, put the whole saw back together, and found that while there was a significant improvement, it wasn't ever going to be a perfect cut. I don't know if maybe just my standards for what I want have increased, because I looked at the first few cuts I ever made with this table saw here, and they're about equivalent to what I had after I finished replacing all the bushings. So I started looking around to find a better option, something more solid that I can make better cuts with. So after looking around online, I stumbled upon an estate sale, and someone had this saw sitting in the back corner. It was all covered in surface rust, and the bearings were seized in it. These are the actual bearings of the saw, or the old ones anyways. And the pulleys were bent, and the belts were all worn to their stretched position. It was sitting on some kind of haphazardly made stand, and it didn't have any extension tables, and the insert was all chewed up. So I ended up picking it up for 30 bucks. I took it home, I got new bearings, cleaned everything, took the saw entirely apart, cleaned every single part, put it all back together, and I knew the motor would run before I picked it up, so I knew that was okay. It's only a little half horsepower, and it works awesome now. Now, oddly enough, the saw was exactly the same height as I had made my initial step to hold my other contractor's base saw. I just had to remove the little shim blocks that I had for the old saw, and this one dropped right in. And the tables are the exact same height, so I got a little lucky there. Now, I knew when building this saw I would have had to cut dado slots to line up with the miter slots here to allow me to use the miter gauges and sleds and whatnot on the saw. I didn't feel like doing that, so I thought I would just make this back portion removable. So it's on normally when I'm doing rip cuts so nothing falls inside it, but when I want to use the sled, the whole thing just pops off. This is the original motor, the original half horsepower, I think it's Hoover motor, it's got a big H on it, that came with the saw. The cool thing about this saw is it's got little grease ports on both sides for the bearings. So that was really cool. It seems like a well-built motor, and obviously it's the same age as the saw and it still works great, so something was well built about it. I did replace the belt with some link belt to help cut down on some vibration. And the saw blade is only I think it was a 9-inch blade is what they were meant for, and I can't easily find a 9-inch blade, so I just went with an 8¼ inch blade, which is pretty easy to get. The other thing I did is changed out the inserts. Normally this is the aluminum insert that it came with, and it works quite well, and if I have to do angle cuts I kept it for that reason. And I just made a zero clearance insert that just slots in there, and this is just made out of Baltic birch. And I just cut down where it rests and use a chisel to fine tune it till I got it to sit flush. And on the end I put a little pin and I drilled an extra hole in the casting here just to lock the front end so it doesn't fly up at me. The way this saw cuts is so much better than my old contractor base saw. All said and done, I probably have about $100 into it once you count the bearings and link belt, and it cuts amazing. The only thing I would do different if I were to take it all apart again is in between the bearings there's a little bushing, and you can, or not a bushing, a spacer, you can just barely see it. These bearings must be just a few thou narrower than the old bearings. So once I put it back together, this spacer in here, if I can get my hand in there, and I can't, isn't quite pinched tightly between the bearings, so it has a tendency to move a bit and it rattles when it spins. Really no big issue, but it's about the only noise on the saw that I can't fix right now unless I pound the bearings back out. And it's not going to do any harm, it's just a slight amount of buzz that I could fix. You can hear it on the spool down. The saw was manufactured by Rockwell, and being that it's a Canadian make, it's harder to track the date via serial number. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.